One, two, three. This is Dr. Alex Avila with Love University, and we're back. I'm an author, psychologist, and speaker, and every week we talk about how to love ourselves, others, and higher nature, how to improve our relationships, finances, health, career, and spirituality. Today we have a very special guest from the Northwest, a gentleman, Neale Walsch, who is recognized as a modern spiritual messenger. He is the author of the classic best-selling series, Conversations with God. He has written over 29 books, translated into over 37 languages. His first book, Conversations with God, was on the New York Times bestseller list for over 2.5 years. He travels worldwide speaking on spiritual topics, peace, love, and unity. And he lives in Oregon with his wife, M. Claire, a poet. Welcome, Donald, to the show.
Thank you, my friend. It's lovely to be here with you.
Yes, it's very exciting. Now, you know, when I scheduled this interview with you, I suggested the date of May 5th. It happens to be, you told me, the 25th anniversary of Conversation with God when the book was first published, which is kind of an interesting coincidence, or what we call synchronicity, according to Jung, in terms of that particular date. And you also wrote a book last year that was interesting called The Essential Path, in which you talked about the alienation and separation of humanity and also authenticity, which brings us to today's situation with the virus, where it's a pandemic in the world, people are lonely, isolated, and it really applies, I think, to your books that you've written, especially the book from last year. And there's two topics that I think are very pertinent. Maybe you can elaborate on. You talk about we're spiritual beings in a physical body and all are one. Tell us about that. How can that give us some hope in these times of turmoil?
Well, what's interesting, Alex, is that in fact, the pandemic is beginning to bring us closer together. It has, at the beginning, separated us, caused us to be isolated. But even in our isolation, we are finding ways to overcome that physical distancing. Yeah. And thanks to the extraordinary technologies that we own as a human species today, one of which is technologies we're using right now, yes. the ability to communicate across miles, yes. But both of us being in our homes. And so what we're seeing, I'm seeing are two things. Number one, a returning to closeness, actually, and a returning also to our own self-introspection, that is looking more deeply at what's really important to me as a human being. Is it important, excuse me, that I go out 3 nights a month or even 1 night a month to dinner at a restaurant? Or is it important that I really share some time, I mean some quality time, not just with the person across the room, yes. But with other members of my family, my immediate family? When was the last time I really sat down with my grandchildren or my mother-in-law, etc.? So we're really returning to a deep exploration of our fundamental values as a species, as I observe it in my own life. This is what's happened to me in the past month and a half, and as I observe it in the lives of those with whom I am communicating almost daily now via this wonderful invention that we have called the internet.
Not perfect. Today we had a little glitch getting started, but I mean, once we resolve that, we can get to the important things. Now, the thing that's I think very interesting is that your work, you talk about spiritual beings and physical bodies.
Yeah.
So the idea that people are now looking at their spirituality, you know, they're internalizing, as you said, and they're looking at what is the meaning of life? You know, what am I doing here?
Yeah, you know what I'm looking at, Alex, what I'm seeing people exploring as well? Yes. We have to make a big decision, and people are now starting to make that decision, or at least to explore it. The decision is this, as I observe it. Mm-hmm. Are we simply mammals? Are we simply chemical creatures, biological entities? Yes. Not much different from fish or birds in the air, except perhaps as to sophistication? Or are we, in fact, yes. larger than that? Is it possible that we are spiritual entities, yes. having a body and having a mind, but not consisting merely of these, but consisting of a third element, which might be the largest and most important element yes. Of the essence of who we are? And if that's true, then we come upon another question. If we really are spiritual entities having a physical experience, then what are we doing here? That is, how does that experience roll out? What is the point of all that's going on? And how can we relate our daily activities to the agenda of what I call the agenda of the soul?
Excellent. Well said. And the idea, Neale, you talk about the burning building instinct, that basically people will risk their lives to go into a building and even to save a stranger. And you call it the higher angels. And people think of, you know, survival instinct, but there's something beyond that. And the idea that we can all be one to help each other. One of our missions at Love University is to help eradicate loneliness. which we define as disconnection from ourselves, others, and a higher nature. And this is amazing that this pandemic, even though there's suffering and death and unfortunate things, is bringing people to recognize that they're very similar, regardless of age and culture and economic status. We all are isolating. We're all are trying to be healthy and help our families. So it is a beautiful thing. I can see that love can really come from this if people understand it. Like you said, a workaholic parent may spend more time with their children now because they're kind of have to do that, but also they find the love within that. So how's that really changing our society or the world society in a certain way?
Well, I think it's changing our world in the sense that we're now looking more closely at that fundamental truth and accepting it as more than just a nice aphorism or a sweet wisdom teaching, but in fact as the functional reality. There's a difference between a conceptual reality, something we conceive of, in our mind, or a functional reality, something that we function out in our daily life. And I think that's what's happening right now. The change we're seeing is that people are moving from concept to function in their exploration of what love really is, what it really means, what it really can do, and the role that it truly does play in our daily experience.
Exactly. The other thing I was thinking about is this idea of purification, resting the land. I think you talk about it in one of your shows that, we have less traffic, less airplanes, so there's less pollution on Earth. And I don't know if you know that term, Jubilee. Back in the Old Testament, they talk about a 50-year period where the land rests for a period of time. So in some ways, people are resting themselves. They're going internal, they're resting, maybe thinking of things, and also the land is resting. So could that be a positive in some ways? I mean, can we?
I think there's no question about it being a positive. And it is really sad, obviously, that we've come to that place of resting, as you've just described, with some attached to it, some tragedies and deaths of people. I think one of the sad aspects of our human experience is it seems to take a lot of tree shaking, a lot of drama, if you please, yes, for us to just wake up and decide to move in a different direction. But given that as a part of the whole equation, yes, there is something positive in it. And you've just nailed it. I think that we're able to now see the larger picture in a grander way.
Exactly. Now, one thing I like about your works, Conversations with God, and many of your works, is you have experiential questions. You teach people practical approaches to apply the principles. For example, you have people ask, what does this have to do with my soul agenda? Or is this what I want the world to hear from God? So you're saying God communicates with us at all times, but we might always listen to it. For example, a piece of paper on the floor that we find, a phone call that comes from some source. So I'm kind of wondering, how do we apply this in our daily life? Let's say we're driving on the freeway and someone cuts us off, and we might have a little road rage and we want to curse the guy out. Do we say, where's my sole purpose? Or what do we say at that point?
Well, that is a one telling question. And I've used that question actually, Alex, to great benefit, yes, to ask myself, whether it's a guy cutting me off on the highway or just a momentary disagreement with my wonderful spouse in the kitchen. Yes. Maybe it's not quite the best morning that one of us is having. Yes. And in the old days, years ago, if my wife spoke to me in a certain way, I might have reacted in a particular way as well, yeah, meeting her energy with my energy and so forth, and maybe even being defensive, if not actually aggressive. But these days, I've used that marvelous, what I call life's magic question. I just say to myself, it only takes me 5 seconds to ask myself the question. And the inner question is, wait a minute, what does this have to do with the agenda of my soul? There's something going on here right now. Whether it's the guy on the highway or the lady in the kitchen or the invitation I've gotten to go to a cocktail party or the choice of what I should watch on television tonight, there's something going on here in this moment. What does this have to do with the agenda of my soul? And I call that process, Alex, recontextualization. I recontextualize the moment itself and then change my experience of it to fall in line with the context that I've created. And very, very often, not once in a while, but very often, it changes my response and moves me into a place of love.
I like that. That's a powerful concept, kind of a cognitive behavioral therapy, but in a spiritual way, where we change our thoughts and our feelings. And the other thing you talk about is all is one. And the question you ask here is there any part of what I'm seeing out there over here happening to me? So we call that empathy, right? Putting yourself in the shoes of others. So they're feeling sadness and isolation. I'm feeling the same. They can feel love and joy. So how does that help to see what's going on over there, the same as what's going on over here?
Well, because it helps me understand. See, Conversations with God told me understanding replaces forgiveness in the mind of the master.
Ah.
If I can understand why another person is behaving the way they're behaving,
Yes.
particularly if they're behaving in a way that I find unwelcome, if not to say offensive,
Yeah.
or even hurtful or damaging. And we've all had those moments where someone else has hurt us or attempted to or actually damaged us. But I've learned in my life to ask myself, now, wait a minute, is there anything over there that I'm seeing that I have seen over here in my life? Have I ever acted in a way that's injurious to others, intentionally or not intentionally? Have I ever used that tone of voice? Have I ever spoken in that way? Have I ever behaved in that way? If I have, then I look to see, how could I have done that? How could I have done that? I can see that they're doing it. How could I have done it? And if I can begin to understand how I could have gone to that place where I did use that tone of voice or did use that particular tactic or did exhibit that behavior, if I can understand how it could emerge from me,
Yes.
then maybe I can understand how it can emerge from the person across the room. And that gives me a new basis for relating to that human being.
That's good. It's very powerful, especially like the idea of being connected to others. But what if someone is evil or maybe angry or hostile? You can see the pain they have because the angry person suffers from their own anger. You see their face getting red and, they kind of have these reactions. So you kind of maybe have compassion in some ways.
Well, that is a very powerful question that goes along with the whole process of self-inquiry.
Yes.
What kind of pain must that person have gone through in their life?
Yes.
In order for them to behave in the way they're behaving now? In fact, a question I like to ask when I'm involved in circumstances like that in life is, what hurts you so much that you feel you have to hurt me in order to heal it?
Yeah, it's powerful.
That's a very powerful question.
Exactly. Because you talk about love is the source of everything, even misplaced love. So does a drug addict steal because they love drugs?
Of course, every act is an act of love. Conversations with God told me that as well. And when I first heard it, I have to say I had a big pushback from it,
right.
but because I didn't really understand it deeply. Every act is an act of love.
Yes.
But that's true, I was told, throughout human history with regard to every single act of the human race without exception. We have loved something. And perhaps expressing that love in a way which is deeply distorted and deeply harmful, but love nonetheless is the sponsoring energy. The thief, steals the pen because he loves the blue pen on the table and he sees that no one else is near it. Why not grab it? And that's a small, silly example, but to use a larger example, if we even sat down with the terrorists of the world.
Yes.
And if I was president of the world when all that terrorism was going on 9/11 and so forth, I would have actually got on international television and I would have said to the terrorists, what do you love so much that you feel you have to hurt someone else in order to protect it, hold it, stop from losing it, or gain it? What is it that you love so much that you're willing to act in the way you're acting?
Exactly. You also say that love can be the remedy. You say love is the best punishment in some ways. And you talk about the African story where someone who does something very bad is brought in front of the whole circle. And instead of being stoned to death, they're actually told the good things they've done in their life. And then they're brought back in a celebration. So how does that work? How can we love through punishment or punishment through love?
Well, I'm not sure that it's punishment. Consequences are not necessarily punishment. So we don't love, punishment is punitive, but consequences are revelatory.
Okay.
And there's a huge difference.
Yes.
Do we want to reveal a person to themselves or do we want to punish that person? The Pope had the same experience a few years ago when he was shot 6 times by an attempted assassin. Yes. And after he survived it miraculously, but he went to the jail cell of his attempted assassin, and he said to him, I'm going to give you my papal blessing if you would receive it. The man couldn't believe that he was receiving the papal blessing. And then the Pope said, tell me why you did that. I'm not going to approve of it. I'm not going to agree with it, but I do want to understand what could cause you to behave in such a way. And you know what? Those 2 people, this is a matter of record, by the way, it's all over the newspapers years ago. They became friends. They became pen pals. They wrote letters back and forth between this attempted assassin and the Pope. And ultimately, after he served 3 years in jail, the Pope asked the Italian authorities to grant him a full pardon and release him, which the authorities did. Now we're talking about applied metaphysics. physics and applied love. A man shoots you, and you love him enough to ask the government to let him go.
That's very powerful. Now, what I like about your work also, Neale, is that you have tools for higher spiritual evolution. You call it being who you really are, which I assume is the higher spiritual nature. You talk about gratitude instead of supplication. So when you give gratitude, you already feel as if you already have that. So you have an abundance, as opposed to just, I want a relationship or I want money, which is more pleading for something that you don't have. So why is that so powerful, that kind of approach?
Well, because it changes the energetics of the interaction that we're having both with ourselves, with the outside world, and if I could go that far, with the divine. When, God said to me in conversations with God, there's only one word in my vocabulary, and that word is yes. So if you're pleading with me, you're as much as acknowledging you do not now have what it is you want. I want more money in my life. I want the perfect partner in my life. God says, yes, you do. That's correct. That is exactly correct. But if you say, all the money I need is coming to me now, thank you, God. God says, you've totally changed the energetic of the way in which you're interacting with the world at large. And don't think that energetic does not have a powerful influence on the outside world, because of course it does.
Right. So you move from a craving or desperation to an abundance. So you feel as if you have it. So you don't have to, go after it as much. The other thing is, we had Mary Williamson on our show, and I think you work a lot with her, and she's a friend of yours. So she talks about only love is real, and fear is an illusion. You take it at a different level, which is interesting. You say that true love is actually self-centered in some ways. So you talk about having to love yourself first before you can love others. Now, some people would say there's agape, which is unconditional love. You're supposed to love the other person without conditions in the highest spiritual sense. So which is it? Should we have selfish love or selfless love?
I don't think they're mutually exclusive. I don't think it's either or. But one of the biggest problems in the world, as I observe it, Alex, is that we have found ourselves in an either or mentality, and we see things as one thing or the other. I'm not seeing those two choices as mutually exclusive. We can experience agape and self-love simultaneously, and the person who does that is called a master.
Okay. So what you're doing, I think you said, are you a master, Neale?
No, I'm not, but at least I know the pathway there, which I did not know 20 years ago.
Okay. So I think you said, I say relationships are more than just companionship, sex, or security. They're to create light in the world, to leave a legacy of goodness. So there's perhaps a higher purpose. And you're saying by fulfilling your own purpose, you can also help the other person as well.
I think that every spiritual master, of which, again, I'm not one, but we are aware of who they are, and many of them have been actually called out by name. I think every spiritual master has, in fact, done exactly that. Yes. They have paid the highest attention to developing who they are, experiencing and expressing who they are. Yes. That is, to put into the world a demonstration of themselves as elements of and aspects of divinity itself. And in so doing, they've touched the lives of other people in such an extraordinary way that others began to behave in that way as well, imitating the behavior that they saw. So, one of the most important messages I ever received in my life was when I turned to God in the moment of my life's highest desperation. 25 years ago, I had a broken neck from a car accident. I couldn't work. I was totally broke, and I was living on the sidewalk, living on the street as a street person. And I called out to God, fell to my knees, literally, and I said to God, okay, what do you want from me? I mean, how does it work? Just tell me the rules. I swear I'll play. Just give me the rules. What does it take to make life work? And I could hear the voice in my ear, just in a kind of a chuckling way, not derisively, but the way we chuckle at a 3-year-old child who can't quite put the blocks together. And the voice said to me in this sweet, soft, chuckling way, Neale, it's really very simple, sweetheart. You think your life is about you, and it has nothing to do with you. It's about everyone whose life you touch and the way in which you touch it. Oh. And when I began to, and I heard that, and when I began to turn my life around and have that be my top priority, everything changed. All the things that I was stressing for, straining for, striving for, fell in on me automatically.
Wow.
I couldn't believe that because of the shift of energetic that occurred within me with regard to the rest of the world.
That's a reversal of perspective. Like instead of contracting, you're expanding the energy. In the Asian philosophy, there's ki or chi, but you're talking about a life force. That's beautiful. And also you talk about being your highest self. And you say that, imagine if you have the highest thought about yourself, how would you be? So I think you're talking about compassion, love, and those kind of things, gratitude. But people are often stuck in temptations, like I think bad habits. So how do we reverse that? Let's say we want to eat a lot, we're at home now, so we have temptation to go to the refrigerator and stuff ourselves, but we want to lose weight. So we have part of our mind says, you're going to be fat anyways, you might as well eat it and enjoy it. Another person says, no, I want to be healthy. So how do we get beyond that temptation in your approach?
Well, I think by getting clear, just being very clear with ourselves on what it is we really do want. What is our highest life priority? And not regarding such things as, dieting and eating. And I mean, it's fun to talk about that, but really the highest priority with regard to life's biggest questions. There are 4 fundamental questions in life as I observe it. 1, who am I? Mm-hmm. I mean, really, who am I? 2, where am I? What is this place? I don't mean what room am I in, or even what country am I in, or even, I'm not even talking what planet am I in, but where am I in the overall scheme of things? What is this physical place that I found myself in? So the questions are, who am I? Where am I? Question 3, why? Why am I where I am? And question number 4, what do I intend to do about that? Alex, I ask myself those questions every morning when I look at myself in the mirror and every night before I turn in. Who am I? Where am I? Why am I where I am? Wow. And what do I intend to do about that? And I have found by that process of self-examination that I completely divorced from the old priorities that I had in life. I was born in an era when I was told by my culture and even by my family, here's the deal, Neale. It's about get the girl, get the guy, get the car, get the job, get the house, get the better job, get the better car, get the better house, get the spouse, get the better spouse, get the better spouse, get the better spouse, get the office in the corner with your name on the door, get the building on the corner with your name on the building, get the retirement watch, get the cruise tickets, get the sickness, and then get the hell out. And that was the formula. That was the formula for life. And I lived that formula, Alex, for almost a half century. Wow. Until I finally woke up one day and I said, wait just a minute. There's got to be more to this than that. There's some data missing that would change everything. What is it I don't understand about life? The understanding of which would change everything.
Wow, it's pretty powerful. And also, Neale, you talk about the joy is in creating, not necessarily the results. In the East, we have a phrase that says, work and give the fruits to God, and you can have infinite work. Because many times, like you said, people work for accolades, for money, for different things, but you just focus on the love, right? The love, whatever you do. And we believe that Khalil Gibran says, work is love made visible. So how does that make a difference in our life? Because many people can't work today, and some people can still work, but how do we change our mindsets in terms of that idea?
Well, many people can work today. There's nobody who can't work today. They just need to redefine, to recreate their definition of work. See, what is the work we came here to do? Yeah. Is the work we came here to somehow, as you said a minute ago, acquire stuff and achieve things? God said to me something very interesting. She said, don't do what you're doing to change the world, or even to impact the world. Do what you're doing to change yourself. And in doing the second, you will ignite the first.
Ah, it's beautiful said. Who said that? Was that Marianne or someone like that?
No, that was God.
Oh, God told you that. Okay.
That is, I received that in my conversations with God. And I want to make something clear to anyone who's watching this now. Yes. Everyone is having conversations with God. These are in moments when we are inspired, when we're open to a place of deep wisdom that resides within all of us. So I don't hold myself out as a person, oh, wow, Neale Donald Walsch thinks he's having conversations with God. I know that we're all having such experiences. We're simply calling it something else, women's intuition, a stroke of genius, an epiphany, whatever we want to call it, so we can stop ourselves from being marginalized.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, it's interesting. But the key, I think, it says to listen to the message and apply it, whatever that might be, right? Some people may get it, I shouldn't be with that person in a relationship, but they don't listen to the message. And then they suffer for abuse or suffer problems as a result. So how do they break free from a bad relationship? Say they're being beaten up or emotionally abused.
This is going to be an interesting way to answer it. They love themselves out of it. They allow themselves to use that energy we've been speaking about from the beginning, that you and I both call love.
Yes.
They allow themselves to find themselves on the list of people that they love. And they love themselves out of those situations and those kinds of relationships. And by the way, not necessarily by condemning or punishing or even accusing the other, but by having the compassion to understand, what kind, as we talked about a minute ago, what kind of pain could that other person have gone through or been subjected to in their earlier life in order to be treating me the way they're treating me now. So, there are no demons and there are no villains. And so we decide that we're not going to be the hero and the victim of our own story simultaneously. We simply step aside and say, okay, with compassion and with love, I understand how it is you could possibly have treated me that way. And with compassion and love for myself, I understand how I could have allowed myself to put up with it for as long as I have. And with compassion and love, I give myself now permission to move to a different experience of life that doesn't include this level of being mistreated.
But Neale, I work with majorly depressed people, let's say even suicidal. And what if they say, first of all, no one loves me? They get in a negative downward cycle. I don't even care about myself, and I don't believe in a God. So what do you say if someone's hopeless like that? They're at the bottom edge. I think you were that way, weren't you, about 25 years ago?
I wasn't quite in that place. Yes, I was a place of being suicidal for sure, and I was ready to end my life. I think the one place that I wasn't in that I didn't believe in God. I did believe in God. I simply didn't understand why God had forsaken me.
Because you're a Catholic, I think, upbringing.
Yeah, exactly. I thought there was a God, but like, where is he? Where is he?
Okay.
What's going on? Why has he left me here? To my own devices, and I wound up being a street person.
Wow.
What I would say to a person who's suicidal would be different to every person. I have actually worked with people who are coming to me with suicidal thoughts. And of course, there's no one answer fits all response to your question. But I would do what I could to return them to a deeper, richer understanding of themselves in the sense of their true identity. I would begin to ask them, who are you in relationship to the rest of the world? I would lead them through a process where I would allow them to examine their own true nature and get their mind off of what's happened to me or woe is me or what's going to happen or all the events of my life, all of which are true. I wouldn't get them into a place of denial, but I would say, let's take a look at your true identity, and if there might be another way to respond to these incoming energies and these ongoing events. And I have to say that when I work with people in that way, often I open a door that they didn't even realize was there. Now, a lot of trained psychiatrists and psychologists are not allowed by their ethics to bring up such subjects as God or the afterlife or the soul or the soul's agenda or items such as that, unless it's brought up by the patient. But if it's not brought up by the person you're working with, many ethical constrictions do not allow a helping person, to bring such topics up. I'm not restricted by those constrictions, so I can sit down with somebody. In fact, they've come to me apparently because they want some spiritual insight, because they know who I am and the books I've written. So I'm free to invite them to explore life at a much larger level, a much higher level, and within a totally different context.
And also, I can see spirituality also dealing with internal elements. For example, gratitude is a tremendous healer. Research shows that keeping a gratitude journal, writing 3 things you're grateful for every day, can reduce depression by 30% if you do that.
Well, Byron Katie wrote a book about that called Loving What Is.
Exactly. It's really powerful. So the idea that even if you don't have nothing in your life, you can say, well, look at the birds outside, and there are people that love each other, and whatever you can look at outside that's beautiful can be a feeling of gratefulness. So that can actually transform people. But then, Neale, we get to a very kind of challenging topic for a lot of people, the idea of death. Now, unfortunately, we have a lot of death. We have 70,000 people in the U.S. have died from this virus, 203,000 worldwide. Yet we know that death is part of life. 50 million people, they say, die a year. About 130 million people are born a year. So love seems to triumph over death in some ways. But you see death differently. You see that death is not something to fear or to avoid, because the soul can transmute into something more beautiful. Now, there's a culture where they say that when a person is born, they mourn that because a limitless spirit has gone into a limited body, And when they die, they celebrate because now the spirit is free. So how do you view death? Because for many people, they suffer. Obviously, a loved one is very painful. But how do you see it?
I did happen to write a book called Home with God in a Life That Never Ends.
Wow.
And that's a dialogue book in which I ask God many of the questions that people raise around the whole topic of death. And I started by asking God, okay, what is death? Just give it to me in a simple sentence. Don't give me a 15-paragraph, philosophical, exposition. Just tell me in a sentence, what is death? So that I can understand it better and hold it in a way that's more accurate. And God said, Neale, it's really very simple. Here we go again. It's really very simple. Death is simply a process of re-identification. I said, wow, no one ever put it that way in 10 words or less. Death is a process of re-identification? Yes.
Wow.
Death is a process by which you redefine who you are and who you then choose to be. The soul, of course, does live forever. It always was, is now, and always will be. So death is also, in that sense, a fiction, in that it is not the end of anything, but the beginning of the next evolutionary step in the process that your soul is undergoing. And what God also said to me was, no one dies at a time or in a way that is not of their choosing. So death is, this is a radical spiritual thought. I'm told that death is a choice. That is, again, no one dies at a time or in a way that is not of their choosing. So I have learned to, when I am confronted with the death of those I love, and I have had that experience now as an older gentleman, people that I've known for years around me are dying. Yes. And I've learned to experience death and to talk about death as one is celebrating a continuation day. My father-in-law, just a couple of years ago, celebrated his continuation day. And that's how I refer to it, both in writing and in my talks whenever I have a chance to speak with people. And I've been asked to give, the eulogy because of the books I've written at several, celebration of life events. And I always talk about death in terms of that. This is Jerry's continuation day. And we ought not mourn. We have no need to mourn that. We can mourn our own loss. It's entirely natural and entirely understandable to mourn our own loss. In fact, it would probably be unnatural for us, and maybe even at some level unhealthy, for us not to mourn our own loss. But we don't need to mourn any loss on their part, because they're moving on and continuing, and we will as well. I recall one time, Alex, a very close friend of mine died on the tennis court. Wow. Actually, he was just having a great game of tennis. Right. And he had apparently a stroke or a heart attack, and he died right there on the spot. No. But when they walked up to him, he had the biggest smile on his face you could ever imagine.
Playing tennis in heaven, maybe, or wherever he is.
Whatever. He was just smiling. He was smiling ear to ear. Okay. And his dear wife was so grateful to see that and to know of it, because she said, "Wow, he loved tennis so much. If he had to go on this day, this would be the way he'd want to go, with a tennis racket in his hand."
So, would you want to go on a podcast, Neale? If you had
to I've done some shows where I thought I was dying, but this is not one of them.
Okay. Now, the other thing that Neale thought was fascinating is you talk about in the book the deal that souls can travel at the speed of thought. So once you die, you said you think of your family members, you can actually go there, or to your children. So there's like a multidimensional kind of movement you can make. But in the real world, in our daily life, we think of something that may take weeks or months to actualize. So how do we close the gap when we're alive between thought and effect, so we can bring things into our life?
By acting immediately, as you said a minute ago, by acting on it and not just letting it dwell there and putting it on the list for some day. Okay. I don't have a someday list anymore. I used to. I was a great procrastinator in my 30s and 40s, but I don't have a someday list anymore. I have a today list, what I'm going to do today. Right. And it's usually more than I can do in one day, but that makes me happy because I get up the next day and I have a continuation of the today list. Yes. But so the answer is really to make a commitment and a determination. I am going to do that. And I have a commitment, for instance, to send the first 10 chapters of my new book to my literary agent by this afternoon, as a matter of fact. And I've taken a few minutes out to share this time with you. And as soon as we get finished here, I'll be right back to the keyboard where I've been all morning to continue that process. But it's only because I've made that commitment.
Right. So instead of the illusion of a lot of time in the world and having this luxury of laziness, you don't do that anymore.
Well, no. You know what I've learned, Alex? Nothing makes me more productive than the last minute.
Oh, I'm the same way too, actually, but that's not good though, is it? Procrastinate. I mean, that's kind of like the last minute thing.
Yeah, I make every minute in my life the last minute.
Every minute. Oh, okay. So you don't just wait till the actual day of the.
Oh, no. Like, what if this were the last minute?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Oh, wow.
And so I make every minute the last minute, and that is really what moves me forward and pushes me to achieve, frankly, much more than I ever thought I'd be achieving at the age of 76. It never even occurred to me that I'd be working at the level that I'm working right now at this age in my life. I thought I'd be sitting back watching, soap operas on television. Not happening.
Wow, that's pretty cool. And the other thing you talk about that's cool, I think, kind of summarizes is the idea of the highly evolved being, the HEBs you call them, people who are really into unity and sharing. It kind of reminds me of a little story where a man went to the house of his beloved. He knocked, and the beloved answered the voice, said, "Who is it?" And he said, "It is I." And the voice answered, "There is no room for you and I." The door was locked. He went away for a year of contemplation and serenity. He came back. He knocked on the door again. And the voice asked, "Who is it?" And he said, "It is you." And the door was opened. So the unity of individuals is the idea of the story. But also, you've heard the phrase, of course, the noosphere, this unity of human thought, maybe collective unconscious. Some people think it's the internet. And then what we call the omega, and in some ways, and the omega point, this point of unification. You call it the critical mass of energies around an idea. So is this virus an omega point for some people?
Of course there is. It was made very clear to me, all things are one thing. There is only one thing, and all things are part of the one thing there is. And since I was given that information, I've seen everything that I look at. The tree outside the window here, the small dog that we have is one of our pets in the home, to say nothing about the person across the room. And so I'm beginning to understand, not just to conceptualize, but to functionalize the idea of oneness and unity. And to get back to where we started, love is the way that one does that. It's the energy that allows us to functionalize what we have already conceptualized.
Yes, that's powerful. And, through pain and suffering, I anticipate, love and hope can come from this. People can be transformed, as you call evolution of spirit, and move beyond just the self focus, but into the us focus. So it's beautiful to have you on the show, Neale. You've done great work over the years. I mean, God has worked through you as you have, and I really appreciate you being on the show.
Well, thank you, Alex. It's lovely to be here, and it's very sweet of you to have invited me. I've enjoyed every single minute of it, and perhaps one day we can do it again.
Definitely. Now, where can people hear more about you? Do you have a website? I know you've written many books and you do many things. Anything you even have some nonprofits that you work with? Tell us about where they can reach you.
Well, if anyone wants to stay connected with the energy of conversations with God, they can just go to cwgconnect.com. There they will find me every day, actually 3 times a day, usually on a platform called Ask Neale, where they can ask me any question they may have about the content and the meaning of the messages and passages in the 9 dialogue books.
Perfect. So, Love University students, if you have any questions, you can email us at loveuniversitylove@gmail.com, 310-226-8090. Visit us at loveuniversity.love. Like us on Facebook at Love University Podcast, also Instagram and Twitter at Love U Podcast. Until next time, Love University students, put away your notepads, your books, your iPads, and this is Dr. Alex Avila.